The first night the cameras went live, the mansion felt too quiet to be safe. Ethan Blackwood sat alone in his study, a glass untouched beside him, and watched black squares come to life on a monitor. Each frame showed a corner of the nursery, a crib here, a low chair there, a patchwork rug that swallowed sound. The house had always been full of things he could buy. It had never been full of the thing he could not. Certainty. Yet, he was the kind of man towns whispered about, the youngest billionaire in the state, a name on buildings and endowments. But the loss that had hollowed his life could not be bought back. His wife had died 2 years earlier, and the triplets Leo, Noah, and Eli had come to be the center of a grief that money could not steady. Doctors had given cautious words and dates. Staff came and left in a series of polite exits. Ethan hired more hands when friends suggested it, fired some when mistakes were made, watched others leave because the work was too quiet, too long. Fear, he told himself, required evidence. If he could see what happened when the door closed, he could fix it. If you value quiet, humane stories like this, consider subscribing. Clara arrived on a damp Tuesday morning. She kept her head down in the doorway and wore shoes that had been worn soft at the heels. She introduced herself with a simple name and a slower smile. She smelled faintly of lemon soap and the kind of calm that comes when a person has learned to make room for others rather than for herself. Ethan met her once, at most. He gave instructions from a list, left a binder of routines on a shelf, and watched her fill the schedule with a steadier hand than he expected. Then he returned to the study and his monitor screens. The cameras were supposed to catch neglect, to expose incompetence so he could correct it with the currency he understood best: contracts, agencies, firings. What the footage began to show was different. Night after night the frames collected small, precise acts. Clara arrived at the nursery quiet as a thought. She hummed under her breath a tune that had no words but that seemed to steady the air. She sat on the floor more often than she bent over cribs. She placed a metal pot lid beside her, not as a toy but as a simple, steady sound source, and tapped it the way a person taps their own pulse to remember they are alive. The footage did not scream. It allowed the camera's eye to register tiny things. A hand cupped at the wrist, a finger tracing the outline of a tiny ear, the angle of light across a cheek when she leaned in to reboot a breathing routine. Clara's hands moved with an economy that suggested practice, not frantic improvisation, but learned patience. She would rub the back of a child's hand slowly, hum, and then wait without changing anything. As though she trusted that time and repetition mattered more than immediate results. There were micro-habits. Ethan had never asked to be filmed. Clara told stories, softly, about a farm with a broken fence, or about a brother who once learned to count by tapping pebbles. It was not that the tales were instructional. They were scaffolding for attention and invitation for the triplets to follow a voice until distracted patterns loosened. She used no complex devices. She used her breath, the slow cadence of her words, the weight of her body settled beside theirs, and a pot lid tapped at a steady rhythm when their eyes drifted. Ethan watched until the office clock blurred. At first, he took notes, timestamps, minor anomalies, lapses in prescribed routines. He told himself he would compile a report. Then his reports turned into a ritual of observation that bent toward awe. He began to watch for the one evening when nothing seemed to happen, and then a small thing did, or it was almost nothing. A tap. A lid struck with the merest sound. Eli, always the most withdrawn, lifted his hand and then, more slowly than anyone would hope, tapped the lid back. The camera caught it at an angle that made the movement look like a small, deliberate negotiation. An index finger meeting metal, pause, response, not reflex, not random. The way his wrist turned for the second tap suggested not mere movement, but attention. The screen froze that night in Ethan's memory. The image stayed with him like a photograph you can't fold away. Doctors had advised him to keep hope tempered. The diagnosis had come with careful language. variable responses, uncertain prognosis. In Ethan's life, uncertainty had been an enemy to be managed. So when he saw Eli's hand move toward sound and carry intention, a thread he had nearly cut through the days after his wife's death tugged back into place. For weeks, Ethan watched. He watched and slept less. He missed board meetings because he had gifts to return to the gray scroll of footage. The company inboxes stacked. Calls blinked on his screen unanswered. He convinced himself it was research. He told himself he was protecting his children. He did not tell himself that he was watching because the footage made him a witness to a form of care he had not known how to buy. The cameras, however, did more than record. They forced him into the role of a ghost parent present and absent at once. When he held the day-after-day images against memory, guilt grew heavy. He had arranged 4 cameras because he feared negligence, and what he had done, in secrecy, felt suddenly primitive. He had taken his children's privacy and reduced their lives to frames he could audit. The ethical implications landed in his chest like an unexpected blow. One rain-heavy evening, he arrived home early, breaths shallow from the city, and the hum of his own impatience. The house smelled of polished wood and lemon oil. He climbed the stair that led to the nursery and paused outside the door. From the crack beneath, he heard Clara's voice, low and steady. He opened the door as if the hinges might give him courage. The nursery was dim, lit by a small lamp aimed toward a mural of stars. Clara lay on her side on the rug, her cheek close to the floor. The boys were propped against pillows with a scatter of stuffed animals between them. She was telling a story not one of instruction, but of small survival. She spoke of a river she had once crossed with a child on her back, of times when people had little and still found ways to sing. Her hands restlessly made small gestures. She paused and waited. The children followed the cadence like a small boat following a steady hand at the oar. Ethan watched, and the sound of the traffic outside swelled into an ache. He had not expected to be moved by someone else's ordinary courage. He had expected proof of failure, a ledger entry he could settle with money. Instead, he found himself arriving at a truth that had been hiding in plain sight. Presence mattered more than policy. He sank to the doorway, a dry sound part grief, part relief left him. Clara looked up, startled, then measured. Her face did not flush with triumph. She had not known she had an audience. There was a brittle moment of fury in him, not at Clara, but at himself, for the cameras. For the hours he had spent as a stranger watching his children, for thinking surveillance could replace presence. He felt a sudden shame like a hand on his chest. The moral ambiguity of what he had done could not be smoothed away by explanations. He had meant protection. He had enacted control. That evening, he decided to stop watching, or he did more than turn off monitors. He walked into the room and sat on the rug, naked of the corporate armor he wore in meetings. He did not ask to be thanked. He paid attention instead. He listened to Clara's story finish. When it hung between them, he said her name and asked nothing about methods or background. He asked if she would let him try to help her with the boys in the afternoons. She blinked, as if the offer carried weight she had not expected, then nodded. He removed the cameras the next day. There was no ceremony in the act, just the quiet unhooking of lenses and the soft release of data from his life. He acknowledged the camera's moral error aloud to a private counselor and to the one therapist he trusted, who reminded him that good intentions do not erase violations. He used his resources then in ways that felt more like repair than replacement. He raised Clara's status from employee to family-supported caregiver, offered training and steady hours, and invested in consistent, long-term programs that emphasized repetition, attention, and time rather than quick fixes. Clara's backstory came out in small, careful disclosures over months. A childhood on the edge of a small town. A brother who had taught her to be patient because patience had kept him alive. The loss of a father who left them to fend on their own. She spoke without seeking pity, and Ethan found himself listening the way one listens to a weathered map. He did not mythologize her. She was not a miracle worker. She was a person who had learned certain crafts from hard life and had practiced them with the triplets until small shifts registered. Change, when it arrived in increments. It did not make headlines. It did not fit the billing of a public miracle. It came as a series of tiny victories. Leo held a plastic cup for a few seconds and did not drop it immediately. Noah laughed for the first time in a room where Ethan could be present without agenda. Eli reached for a lid again, and this time did not hesitate. Months later, Ethan watched not on a monitor now, but surrounded by the slow, messy domesticity he had avoided on. Saw a smile curved on Noah's face that was not prompted by a camera, but by a story. Clara told about a dog who would not leave its owner's side. Those moments reframed what he thought protection meant. He had come to believe that more money and more professionals would fill the emptiness left by his wife. He learned instead that consistent time, steady attention, and humility about what wealth could not control mattered more. He began to attend therapy sessions with the boys. He learned how to count pebbles in the way Clara taught. He learned to sit without speaking. He found that presence required him to do the smallest possible thing, to be there, again and again. The cameras, ethically speaking, were a mistake. Ethan acknowledged that openly. They represented a moment when fear outweighed trust, and he accepted responsibility for that. But they also, in their unintended way, become a catalyst for change, forcing him to see what he had been asking others to do in a way he had refused to try himself. That tension is the hard thing to hold. The recognition that wrong choices can provoke right ones, and that reparations must be made with humility. In the hush of late evenings now, the house sounds different. It is still large and still furnished in fine things, but there is a softness where there had been only polished surfaces. Clara is no longer a hired helper on a relay of shifts. She is part of a rhythm Ethan learned to sustain. He stepped back from the instinct to control and leaned into a practice of small, steady acts. He invested in long-term supports therapists, consistent caregivers, adaptive toys that mirrored Clara's patience instead of displacing it with quick tools. When people ask him what the cameras revealed, he no longer speaks about evidence or about being right. He speaks about a truth that surprised him, that the triplets were not a problem to be solved solely by money, and that the person who changed their days did not arrive with degrees or endorsements, but with a steadiness that invited response. He tells the story without glamorizing Clara or the boys, without pretending their lives are simple or fixed. He tells it as a record of slow work and small trust. The boys did not become whole overnight. They did not become characters in an uplifting clip that ends with a single, triumphant frame. They became, incrementally, more present, more aware, more responsive, more engaged in ways that a father could witness with his own heart, instead of through a lens. Ethan learned to accept uncertainty and to be patient with progress, measured not in headlines but in minutes and shared breaths. If this story leaves you thinking about what it means to protect rather than possess, if you carry a quiet belief that presence can be more powerful than power, then consider staying for more stories like this. Subscribe for pieces that choose dignity over spectacle. In the end, the most shocking truth the cameras exposed was not about negligence or conspiracy. It was about what wealth cannot buy. The slow alchemy of attention and time. That truth did not arrive as an epiphany so much as a series of small, persistent moments. A lid tapped, a hand reached, a laugh that was allowed to appear. Those were the things that steadied a father who had once believed he could control everything, and that taught him, finally, how to stay.